When the DJI FPV drone first came out, I had my doubts. I've been flying FPV for a while now, building, crashing, repairing, and to me this drone seemed too delicate and expensive for all that. Facebook was inundated with pictures of people breaking their DJI FPV drone arms and cameras, and I was reminded of how often I slam my carbon fiber FPV drones into concrete with like minimal damage. But while I still don't think this drone will be winning any awards for durability, I realize it's filling a significant gap in the market. A gap spanning the two worlds of intelligent GPS-assisted camera drones that basically fly themselves, and home-built FPV quads that require significant knowledge to build and significant practice to fly. This drone release is the first time we get a decent taste of both. Still not very crashable, but maybe less likely to be put into a crashable situation if we understand its limitations and what it's designed to do. If you buy the DJI FPV combo, it's currently $1,300 US. You get the drone with some extra props and a gimbal cover, the V2 goggles with its attachable antenna, head strap, and external battery, and the V2 remote with some extra thumbsticks. The V1 remote and V1 goggles do not work with the new DJI FPV drone, which is a bit of a bummer. Various other cables for charging and data transfer are also included in order to update the firmware, which takes a good amount of time actually, using the DJI Assistant 2 FPV series software. One drone battery is included, but for $300 extra you can get the Fly More kit, which includes 2 extra batteries and a charging hub which charges each battery in sequence. Each battery charges in about 25 minutes, so not too bad. Even though this puts the total price at $1,600, those 2 extra batteries are pretty essential for a meaningful flight session of any real length. I also opted for the DJI Care Refresh plan. For $200, it's a bit steep considering replacements also cost money on top of that, but you still come out ahead considering the drone is $740 to replace by itself. I also went for the optional $200 motion controller, and that brings my total to $2,000, so I appreciate everyone who's watching this without ad blockers. The DJI FPV drone has a 4K 60 frame per second camera at 120 megabits per second, capable also of 120 frames per second at 1080, and many additional camera settings. I find myself flying in auto camera exposure most of the time so I can focus on the movement controls. With an increased 10 kilometer range and also dual 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz frequencies, along with 50 megabit per second transmission, this is an extremely strong signal that I've yet to really see mush up or freeze on me. One thing that's odd is that 4K onboard video recording with the micro SD card placed inside the drone is available only in high quality video transmission mode, which is billed at around 40 milliseconds latency. If you switch to low latency mode at 28 milliseconds, which is preferable for fast-paced flying, then video recording via the drone's micro SD card is limited to 1080p. The camera has a one-axis gimbal. The pitch of the camera will be stabilized in normal and sport mode, but it is not stabilized in manual mode. The option to turn on electronic image stabilization, or EIS, in the recorded video is available. There are obstacle avoidance sensors facing forward and downward and help to slow down the drone around obstacles in normal mode, as well as hover and land safely. And it wouldn't be a DJI drone without GPS functionality too, as well as their new ADS-B system, which alerts you of nearby manned aircraft. It's very, very handy function. The props come uninstalled, but they're easy to press and turn on. I pretty much just leave them on. I don't usually take them off unless I'm trying to fit them into a bag. They're $15 per set, which is a bit steep for FPV props. I also like the design of the drone, complete with a sleek design. It's got LEDs, an aggressive boot-up sound. It's fairly heavy though, and that took some getting used to despite the powerful motors, but it does feel like a very nice and powerful FPV quad. The goggles are visually identical to the V1 goggles from 2019, but this time they offer OcuSync 3.0, which provides for that 10-kilometer transmission range and dual frequency transmission. A GPS home icon tracks the ground exactly where you took off too, which is great for not losing your bearings. USB-C video out works well to view live on a cell phone, although only for the DJI FPV drone right now. The V2 goggles can bind and spectate to air units and vistas, but the USB-C video out does not work with those devices yet. It has a higher refresh rate of 144 Hz, higher resolution of 810p, and higher voltage input limit of 25.2 volts or 6-cell voltage. The included external battery lasts around 110 minutes and has a power button for checking charge level. The battery is $30 when bought separately, and it's so convenient with a USB-C charging port that I may just pick myself up another one for regular use. Now, I've never been a fan of the amount of light leak I get on the sides of the goggles. And maybe it's my nose that's too big. Either way, I use 3D printed shims to push the goggle phone against my face more. I don't like using DJI's sponge foam padding because of how porous it is. It gets gross with sweat in the summer. For me anyway, I sweat a lot. The remote control V2 is very different from the V1, and this time around it's more of a video game style controller preferred by thumbers. For FPV, I like to use like more of a hybrid pinch control style when I use my index finger to support the side of the stick while my thumbs do the majority of the work. And the shape of the controller makes this a little awkward, especially for pressing the buttons on the back. There are buttons, a switch, and a dial on the back you will need to be familiar with. The info about each is printed upside down on them, so you can easily read them while still grasping the controller, which is nice. Out of the box, the left stick, which is throttle in mode 2, is center sprung. This means the gimbal springs back to center when not being pushed or engaged. So if you're gearing up to fly in manual mode, it's preferable that you disengage that spring by turning the F1 screw on the back so that the throttle no longer springs back to center. It's an odd feel at first, but it helps greatly with maintaining throttle control in manual mode. So, speaking of modes, the DJI FPV Drone has a handful of flight modes spanning from normal mode, which is the most simplified and slowest mode, complete with obstacle avoidance training wheels, all the way to full manual control. In normal mode, it feels like a Mavic Pro with very familiar stick controls, and you can tilt the camera up and down with the dial on the rear left of the remote control. Releasing the controls brings you to a stationary hover. Flicking the switch on the back to sport mode enables a top speed of 60 miles per hour and disengages obstacle avoidance. And within sport mode are three smaller modes, 3 roll angles they call them. The first one is no roll angle. The second one is small roll angle. And the third is large roll angle. These progressively increase the level of roll you see in the goggles as the drone banks and turns. However, the trusty auto level feature will still maintain a Mavic-like pitch and roll. Manual mode is where things get interesting. It unlocks the full speed of this drone, pushing over 90 miles per hour into tailwind with no governor, and deactivates any sort of self-leveling features. This is the mode people get in trouble with. If you release the thumbsticks, the drone will continue at the same direction and angle that you left it at. This is the mode you'll want to have some practice in a flight simulator beforehand, before you try and enter. Full manual mode may be the ultimate goal for you, but the key to a successful flight in manual is only enter it when you're ready. Now, out of the box, manual mode is actually disabled. You have to reprogram the custom mode position of the flight mode switch on the remote control to manual, and then go into your expo settings and disable the attitude limiter, which will enable you to flip and roll, no longer maintaining any sort of max angle degree.
Now, I think a lot of people are gonna fly in normal and in sport mode the majority of the time when they first get it. And I think a lot of people are, so far what I've seen in like Facebook and stuff, they are posting pictures of broken drones because they're going into manual too soon. Just remember, this little button right here, the pause button, will save your day. So if anything happens, you freak out, whatever, pause button. It'll go back to normal mode, it'll brake, it'll stop, and it'll hover right in place for you. And by the way, there's no shame in flying this in just regular old sport mode. A lot of people are gonna have fun. They're gonna be cruising along the beach or in the mountains in sport mode, and there'll be no reason to go into manual mode. But manual mode is pretty fun.
So, how do you practice for manual mode safely? Well, DJI's new virtual FPV flight simulator is available for iOS. I do not have an iOS device capable of playing it, so I cannot show you, but Billy Kyle has a great video. I suggest you watch his video on DJI's virtual FPV flight simulator. Holding that button also serves as your return to home button, which works very well.
I have my return to home set at 328 feet, which is standard. So I'm initiating return to home now.
We tested it from a takeoff point under some tree limbs, and it successfully moved away past the trees to clear ground upon return to home, even moving past the rear hatch of my vehicle.
If I took off here, did it
It
know to
avoided
move?
the tree. Holy crap.
Maybe it did.
That thing's smarter than we are.
Return to home can be initiated manually or automatically from loss of signal. Now, I mentioned earlier that I bought the motion controller. This will probably be a separate video for me, but I did try it out a few times. After a flight or two, it became easier, but it is a unique experience, and I don't think I enjoy it over the regular controller. I honestly like the drone and the V2 FPV system as a whole. It performs really well, everything boots up and binds properly. Aside from the initial lengthy activation and firmware updates that really kind of were a pain considering there are 3 devices of the system, it actually took a significant amount of time to do that. The actual flight session setup is very quick. Flight time for a decent manual acro flight is between 10 and 11 minutes, which is phenomenal in the 5-inch FPV freestyle world. The drone handles prop wash well and feels very powerful. It handles like a normal FPV quad in many ways, especially after I put in some custom control rates in. Wind does make it vibrate around a little bit, but it still handles itself pretty well. The 4K camera looks crisp and clear, and the amount of advanced camera settings allow you to dial in a cinematic and even gradable look while flying in normal or sport mode. And the rock steady stabilization, the EIS, works really well. Now for some cons. I'm not a fan of the price of the batteries. Even though 10 or 11 minutes is great for freestyle FPV, it's pretty bad at $160 a battery. There are smart batteries with self-discharging and monitoring features. They last upwards of 20 minutes in sport mode, or in normal mode, I mean. But for $160, it still seems pretty high for the amount of time that you might get in manual mode and stuff like that.
I like the DJI goggle battery setup. I actually do. 110 minutes of flight time, but the ability to check by just pressing, see how much battery you have left. You get 6 or 7, maybe 8 flights out of this. Pick yourself up a couple of these, 30 bucks each. Dedicated DJI goggle battery, and actually I kind of like that idea. And the radio, battery life, it's still at 4 out of 4 dots. And I flew this 4 flights yesterday, 3 flights today. Get yourself a lanyard too. This is just a Sweep Wings lanyard that I've been using, and it helps to just rest it when you're not using it.
The onboard video that I'm seeing right now is definitely better than what I'm used to seeing with my DJI system that I normally fly, which is already really good, but this is better. I think like when I did the beach trip last August, and I was flying over the ocean, having all this GPS features, good, I would assume it's probably good onboard recording. I think this would have been a great package. I like the little home arrow or home H and all that. I can definitely feel like I get cinematic shots with it.
I love the flight time, man. That is really impressive. My first impression is it's very Star Wars looking. The goggles blow me away. The image blows me away. The home position that this thing displays. The one thing I don't like is this camera not being like protected.
For my goggles, I use a little 3D printed shield here, which shields the LCD screens from the sun. If you point those LCD screens into the sun without protection like this, you might create sunspots on your LCD screens. I'm also gonna upgrade the strap. I hate the DJI straps. I hate this 3-strap system. Messes up your hair, doesn't fit right, very floppy. I'm gonna get a fat goggle strap and make this so much better.
Now the drone flies well, like I said, but I just wish I felt more comfortable pushing it more. And herein lies my concern. I would love to dive some buildings, race around some parking garages, or freestyle a construction site like I do with my carbon fiber drones. But that's why this drone isn't really for me in the long run. I have a Mavic and I have FPV drones, and I don't really need something like this that makes compromises to have a prop in both worlds, as you might say.
You can buy extra landing gear You can buy, of course, extra props. You can get the replacement gimbal. You can replace the housing. But beyond that, if you do crash this drone and you break anything else, you are sending it into DJI. And that's going to be an expensive fix. And spending time in the mail, in shipment. Probably be 2 weeks before you get it back at least, maybe more. But you do have the DJI FPV simulator that you can practice on. You have the flight modes starting from normal mode to sport mode with no roll angle, all the way to manual mode with the attitude limiter, to full manual mode with the attitude limiter turned off. So there's a stepping process from Mavic type flight all the way to full FPV acro manual flight. So the suggestion would be, don't push yourself too fast too soon with this. Make sure that you've done some practice in the various other more limited flight modes before you go to acro. That's what I can suggest. You might have a great experience just flying this in normal or sport mode. So in that case, the obstacle avoidance and the GPS and all these different little helpful little bells and whistles that would be in normal mode and even some in sport mode would cause you maybe to never ever crash this thing. Don't feel like you need to force yourself to fly in manual just because other people are, or because other people saying that's the only way to do it. It's not the only way to do it. It's only the way to do it if you want to do it. And if you want to do it, go ahead. But don't get carried away. And always in the back of your head, remember what type of drone you really are flying. Check the link in the video description to the FPV drone by DJI with the system and the combo and the extra batteries and all that. I do have an affiliate link there, so I get partial commission if you do purchase through those links, but I'm not sponsored by DJI. They're not paying me to say anything in this review, and I did buy this with my own money, pretty much just to make videos for you guys. So that's part of the reason why I say, hey, purchase through my links. I get a little cut and I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and until next time, happy flying.